Fantasy football may be over for the season, but it is always a good time to take a look back and learn from what happened, and that's what we're here to do today. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Tyler Plath, and part of winning your leagues comes down to finding the guys that will outperform their ADP in the middle and late rounds. We saw guys like Isaiah Pacheco, Michael Pittman Jr., David Montgomery, and Brock Purdy even finished way higher than their ADPs, but there were 7 other guys we believe were better values this year that had more lessons to learn from than those 4 other guys, and so many other values this year in fantasy football. But we're going to take a look at those 7 guys and see what we can pull from them, so we can maybe look into next year and see, well, hey, when draft times are starting up, we look for these guys because of what happened this past year. So before I begin, you may be done with football and fantasy football for the year, and that is totally okay. But I will just say, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Maybe you do want some football content as we get into free agency, the NFL draft, and really, if you are into dynasty fantasy football, this is the place for you. So make sure you're subscribed so you can easily find us whenever you're ready to get back into football. Or if you're here for the long haul, you're here throughout the entire offseason, much appreciate you joining us through the offseason. Make sure you hit subscribe as well. And one other thing I will say before we get into the 7 players, you're not going to see a Puka Nacua or a Kyren Williams on this list because the chances are that you likely found them on waivers more than you actually drafted them. I know people do really, really long drafts, and you can go 18 rounds and 20 rounds, and maybe you picked up some of those guys, but I'm going based off of 16 rounds, which I believe is more standard, more average for fantasy leagues. So again, these 7 players, best values in our opinion this year from the 2023-2024 season, starting with Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. He was drafted as the running back 41 this year, and not only did he outperform it, he finished as a top 5 running back on the year, and he was the running back 4 in fantasy points per game. Now, there were some legitimate reasons for why his ADP was so low and why he was going so late in drafts. There was the threat of another running back coming in, stealing that lead back duties from Raheem Mostert, right? Jonathan Taylor was supposedly on the trade block because he wasn't signing an extension with Indianapolis. So that threat causes ADP to drop. There was also the threat of Devon Achane, their rookie from Texas A&M, who they drafted in the 3rd round. There was a threat that he took over lead duties at some point in the season. And the other part of this too is that Raheem Mostert is in his early 30s, and that's when we typically see running backs really hit a decline, especially running backs with a long injury history like Raheem Mostert. But here's how it all played out for him this year. He was among the league leaders in carries inside the 5, the 10, the 15, and the 20. So he was getting major opportunities in the red zone. He was on an explosive and high-octane offense, so they got the ball into the red zone fairly often. That's why he led the league, or among league leaders in carries in the red zone. But the other part is that he stayed healthy really up until the end of the season. So it may have been an anomaly that we saw a running back 1 on a very explosive, high-octane offense, and I really shouldn't even say it like that. They were one of the highest-scoring offenses in the league. So maybe it was an anomaly that we found the running back 1 for that kind of offense that late in drafts. But I think the lesson to be learned here is this. Take the chance. Take the chance because the payoff could be massive, right? If you drafted Raheem Mostert, odds were you got into your playoffs as a top seed, you made a push into the championship, and maybe you won or lost it depending on, how reliant you were on Raheem Mostert. But the fact is, when you are that late in drafts, take the chance. Take the chance. There's a risk with every player. There's a risk with every pick. So we can't make the excuse of, the injury history is bad. For an 11th round pick in the situation that Raheem Mostert found himself in was an absolute steal, absolute value this year. So why not take the chance if we see another player like that next year? Next guy we'll look at is Sam LaPorta, and the dude was nothing short of historic this year. He was the 3rd rookie tight end in NFL history to have at least 70 receptions in his rookie season. He actually broke the single season rookie record for receptions in a season with 86. And he was the first ever rookie tight end to finish as the tight end 1 overall in fantasy football. And he was the first rookie tight end to actually finish inside the top 5 since Jeremy Shockey in 2002. And if you know football, you know the name Jeremy Shockey. And that's, even 2002, that is 22 years since that happened. Again, historical year for Sam LaPorta. And reason for him going so late in drafts because he was going in the 14th round of drafts. There were some legit reasons for him going so late as well. First off, being a rookie tight end. Rookie tight ends just traditionally don't hit the ground running as quickly as Sam LaPorta did. The second thing is that this Detroit Lions offense, no one really knew how this offense would perform, on a player basis, right? Would Sam LaPorta get overshadowed by the run game, right? With David Montgomery, who they went out and spent money on. Then they took Jahmyr Gibbs with a top 12 draft pick. So you've got the run game with those two guys, and then you've got the passing game that is really, it was all Amon-Ra St. Brown before LaPorta got there. So how much really was there with all the mouths that had to be fed? How much was there for Sam LaPorta to, have the season that he did? And probably the third reason too then, honestly, is people probably just didn't believe in Detroit's offense, that what they saw at the end of the 2022 season would actually kind of carry over into this season, but it certainly did. Now, the thing with Sam LaPorta is that there was plenty of smoke coming out in training camp that, hey, Detroit is going to heavily utilize Sam LaPorta in their passing attack, and there's a lot of smoke that comes out of all training camp buzz. So if you bought into the Sam LaPorta, the Sam LaPorta training camp buzz, it paid off for you. But you combine all those reasons with the buzz, maybe it was a smoke screen, all that stuff. Maybe you didn't take the chance on it. So the question that we have to ask is, do we see another rookie tight end have a season like Sam LaPorta? Maybe it's not necessarily tight end 1 overall. Maybe it's not rookie records being broken, right? But do we see another rookie tight end finish inside the top 5 in fantasy football in upcoming years? And I feel like Sam LaPorta paved the way for that to happen, right? I think immediately for this next year, we've got arguably the best tight end prospect ever in Brock Bowers coming out of Georgia. If he finds the right situation, and I think Indianapolis is a great situation for this to happen, if he lands in Indianapolis, we could see another rookie tight end break that top 5 threshold and be another elite fantasy option. So Sam LaPorta, one of the best tight end values of the year. Again, the tight end 1 overall in the year, tight end 3 in fantasy points per game. The dude was nothing short of spectacular this year. And moving right along here to Texans wide receiver Nico Collins now, who went shortly after Sam LaPorta in ADP in the 14th round. And Nico Collins needs to have more praise thrown his way. He was the wide receiver 60 at draft time, the wide receiver 60 in the 14th round, and he finished as the wide receiver 12 on the year, the wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game. Wide receiver 7 in fantasy points per game as the wide receiver 60 at ADP. That's insane. He had 3 games with at least, 34 fantasy points. 3 games with at least 34 fantasy points. He was 3rd in yards per route run, which is that holy grail of metrics that we typically look for pass catchers. And he was 4th in fantasy points per route run and per target. So when he was targeted, good things happened. And he did that all in 15 games. And there was a game, I believe it was against the Jets, where he left fairly early. So I might even say that he did that all in 14 games. Nico was someone for us fellas that we were 100% okay taking a flyer on in drafts, because really this Houston offense was kind of up for grabs, right? There wasn't really anything, solidified about this team. All that you knew was that you've got a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud. You've got competition in the backfield with Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. Then your wide receivers and even your tight end, right? You're choosing between Dalton Schultz, Nico Collins, 3rd or 4th round rookie Tank Dell, aging veteran in Robert Woods, right? Like everything was up for grabs. And then on top of that, you had the training camp buzz of the CJ Stroud, Nico Collins connection. So while, again, it was another training camp buzz, we were more comfortable taking the risk on Nico Collins and Sam LaPorta because, again, there really wasn't anything, set in stone with Houston. So you could take the chance in the 14th round on a guy like Nico Collins. Now let's take a quick second to mention the biggest quarterback value this year, and that's Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. And this one really kind of came down to Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, and Dak Prescott because they all kind of finished around each other on the year. But Jordan Love was going much, much, much later than Brock Purdy. I shouldn't say Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy was probably a round or two ahead of him, but Dak Prescott was a 9th or 10th round pick. Jordan Love balled out this year. And fantasy aside, I don't know how Green Bay keeps getting this lucky with now their third straight franchise quarterback. Maybe you do need a little bit of luck. Maybe you need some time to develop, but it's as a Vikings fan, it is just painful to watch. But now back to fantasy. Like I said, Jordan Love balled out this year, and he finished as the quarterback 5 overall, the quarterback 6 in fantasy points per game, and he was going as the quarterback 24 in draft time. So odds were that, like, if you needed 2 quarterbacks on your team, one to start, one to bench, or you were actually playing a super flex league, something like that, Jordan Love was one of the last quarterback options that was taken, and he paid off in a big way. 32 passing touchdowns on the year. Good for second most of all quarterbacks this year. He had 4 rushing touchdowns, so that's a little sprinkle of extra points there. And 4,100 passing yards, too. He did have some off games, and I think the reason why Jordan Love's ADP was so low was because I think either people just did not believe in the talent at all, or that there were going to be more bad games than good games. But Jordan Love completely flipped the script on its head. All right, now the next 3 guys that we'll talk about were all middle round guys, 5, 6, 7 round, or 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds, I should say. And first, we'll start with Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints. The dude was just an absolute beast when he came back from his suspension, right? He missed the first 3 games of the year, and then he did miss Week 18, but I sure hope that your leagues were over by Week 18 and that they finished up in Week 17, but like Alvin Kamara, running back 11 overall in just 13 games. He was the running back 3 in fantasy points per game. He was going at the end of the 5th round in drafts, and except for the last 2 games of the season, he had no lower than a running back 19 finish in a single week, and he had 3 games with at least 27 fantasy points. And the guy was just getting touches. I want to say within the first 5 games, he had 2 games with more than 15 carries, maybe 17 carries, and double-digit receptions. The guy was just getting fed the ball like no tomorrow. He was doing Alvin Kamara things, right? This was the Alvin Kamara of old, right? The reception upside with the carries and the goal line work as well. Now, we take a look at reasons why, like, a 5th round, draft capital was where he was going at, right? I really don't think it was too much. It had too much to do with the suspension because everyone knew 3 games, and I think it had more so to do with just what the environment was in New Orleans, if that makes sense, right? You brought in Jamal Williams to potentially steal the goal line touches. You had a rookie in Kendre Miller, who I think a lot of people in the fantasy community were like, don't sleep on Kendre Miller. Only problem with that is that we're talking about Alvin Kamara, who, for the past 3-4 years has been one of the top-end elite running backs in the NFL. So it's not going to, it takes a lot more than just a Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams to really keep Alvin Kamara out of, relevancy. I'll just say it like that. I don't know if we're going to see another player like an Alvin Kamara go in the 5th round of fantasy drafts next year. Maybe there's some holdouts, right? We've got a stacked running back free agent class, right? Where we've got Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard. Like, we've got a stacked free agent running back pool. So maybe some of those players, will drop to the 5th round because they're either holding out for a deal or whatever the reason is. But I think we could also say this for Alvin Kamara. Take the shot. Take the chance on him. Because you know the role, you know the talent. What is there to lose, right? And especially when it comes down to receptions for running backs, you can't go wrong. And our last two players here are on the same team on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll start with running back Rachaad White. And Rachaad White was one of the most surprising players this year. He finished as a running back 4 overall, and that sounds great, but he was closer to the running back 10 in fantasy points per game. It was really just because running backs either missed time with injuries or whatever the reason. Running back 4 overall sounds nice, but it was more so like the running back 10 in fantasy points per game. But still, for the guy going as a running back 26 at draft time this year to be a top 10 running back, that's a pretty good job. The thing with Rachaad White is that he was in a bell cow role, right? There was some speculation at the beginning of the season. Maybe it's Sean Tucker, the undrafted free agent from Syracuse, that comes in and starts stealing touches, and it's a split backfield. That never happened. Rachaad White, he was tied for second in carries behind Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey. He tied Christian McCaffrey and behind Derrick Henry. He was 4th in receptions and 9th in targets, and he added 9 touchdowns along the way. Typically, right, because the running back 26 this year was a 6th round pick, right, for Rachaad White. Typically, bell cow backs that go somewhere in that dead zone, right, rounds 4 to 6 or 7, right, for running backs. Bell cow backs in that range are a bit of a trap because it's kind of this awkward space where you have to value and rank running back ones that aren't either on great offenses or not super great talents or whatever it is. So they are just kind of put there. But the thing that Rachaad White has, and I should say had and has, that most other dead zone running backs don't have, elite athleticism and coaching, and committed coaching, I should say, that wants to run the ball. And that's what Dave Canales wanted to do in Tampa Bay. It was to establish a run to help Baker Mayfield out. And defenses really had to be careful with how they played Tampa, because if they committed to stop the run, well, then you open up so many opportunities for play action or just straight up pass plays to the next guy on our list, Mike Evans. Look, Mike Evans, we all know the talent and the legend that is Mike Evans. He did it again this year. 10th straight season with 1,000 yards or more receiving. His 3rd season in his last 4 with double-digit touchdowns. Good enough to finish as the wide receiver 7 on the year. And the the wide receiver 7 on the year, wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that we all should have known or that we all knew that this Tampa team was really going to outperform and win the division. I mean, let's make this specific. I don't think we all had an idea that Baker Mayfield could be as good as he was this year. So what does it actually come down to, right? If we are dropping the value of players because maybe they're not going to be super great, what helps them outperform those expectations and their ADPs? I think it comes down to coaching. I think it comes down to schemes. I think it comes down to personnel. All that stuff. All the nitty-gritty football stuff, right? It's good coaching that realizes, hey, we need to put our best players, our best talents in spaces and spots to succeed, right? So when you go to Tampa Bay and your top weapons and talents are Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White, I think it's a very, very opportune situation for a guy like Baker Mayfield to come in and succeed. And when a quarterback succeeds like Baker Mayfield did, it helps support a season like we saw from Mike Evans, and it helps keep the defense off balance so that we can see positive results from a guy like Rachaad White. So looking ahead to offenses that probably have a downward projection going into 2024, but could outperform expectations, right? Based with good coaching, specific players. Drake London, no more Arthur Smith, George Pickens and Deontay Johnson, right? You get a competent play caller in Pittsburgh besides Matt Canada, and it's been looking better now, but Who knows what that offense will look like next year? Maybe even Terry McLaurin, right? Ron Rivera is out. Maybe Eric Bieniemy stays, or maybe they bring in a new coach. Ben Johnson has been rumored, right? Dark horse, because everyone seems to attach his name to every team. Mr. Harbaugh, right? You get a good coach in that can actually set up a decent scheme and system for these playmakers. And if they drop in ADP because, again, it's, their offenses aren't going to be the best. I think there's ample opportunity for them to outperform and give you some quality pieces for your fantasy teams next year. Maybe not exactly a wide receiver 7 turnout like we saw from Mike Evans, but look, if we are just looking for values, people to outperform their ADP, because we're just trying to build the best rosters from top to bottom. And there you have it. The 7 best values from fantasy football in 2023 and what we can learn from each of those guys so we can take those and go into next year and maybe look for values to potentially win our leagues. Because like I said at the top, finding those players matters when it comes to either finishing high, avoiding punishments, winning the leagues, all of the sort. And again, like I also said at the top, make sure you're subscribed, right? I know fantasy football season's over. We're getting close to football playoffs and football season ending in February. So maybe you're done for the year, but make sure you're subscribed just so you know where we are, so you can easily find us, because we will be posting throughout the entire offseason, free agency, dynasty fantasy football content, NFL draft stuff, all of that stuff. We will be going through the off season. So again, make sure you're subscribed so you can easily find us, so you can tune in whenever you want. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast, talking about all the things that we got right, but also all of the things we got wrong. So you don't want to miss that. So we will see you tomorrow on that episode. Deuces.